The grim task. Dusty Rivers, is it? The attorney's suit strained at its seams as he peered over half-moon spectacles. You cultivate discretion, I gather. Dusty squirmed in the overly cushioned chair, the sharp citrus scent failing to calm his frayed nerves. Keep to myself, mostly. Ranching ain't exactly a social life. Precisely. Mr. Harding tinted his fingers. Mrs. Abernathy desires a specific arrangement. A clandestine interment, if you will. The sum he named echoed in the room. Salvation, at least for a while. The bank's shadow receding. The busted fence mended, hay in the loft. Boots for Lily that wouldn't leak. He caught his breath. And the particulars? Harding unfolded the scheme, his voice a well-oiled machine gliding over morally treacherous ground. No eulogy, no mourning, merely a hushed burial on the Abernathy grounds. No official record, no bureaucratic fuss. A shiver traced Dusty's spine. That's skirting the law, isn't it? A dry chuckle, like leaves skittering across pavement. Legality is pliable, Mr. Rivers. The late Mrs. Abernathy possessed unusual preferences and demonstrated notable generosity toward my firm. Consider it a service provided, a final courtesy. Courtesy? Dusty envisioned his family, generations rooted in this unforgiving soil. His father, beneath a crude wooden marker, recalled in weathered hands and whispered tales. Was this twisted charade respect? Lily's face bloomed in his mind, alight with wonder as storybook beyond his means. Sarah's weary gaze, marked by the constant struggle. The windmill's ceaseless groan, a stark reminder of their dwindling well. All right, Dusty rasped, the word heavy as lead. I'll do it. Harding's smile flashed, too bright, too perfect. Splendid, quite splendid. All the pertinent details are here. He pushed a thick envelope across the glossy surface. Mrs. Abernathy expired this morning. I have arranged for the consignment to be conveyed to the estate. You will find all that is needed there. Be meticulous, Mr. Rivers. Discretion is paramount, understood? Dusty nodded, snatched the envelope, and all but bolted from the office. The air hung heavy with impending rain. He sank into the worn seat of his pickup, the engine sputtering its complaint as he engaged the starter. The ranch, once a beacon of hope, now felt like an anchor dragging him under. His grandfather had wrestled this land from the wild, raised the barn beam by beam. His father had faced dust and ice, clinging to the promise of betterment. And he, Dusty, was reduced to burying a secret for blood money. He stared at the envelope on the passenger seat. Lily's warmth, Sarah's easing, the ranch breathing. The sky deepened, and heavy raindrops drummed against the glass. He shifted into gear, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. A jagged bolt of lightning illuminated the rolling landscape, painting grotesque shadows on the hills. The Abernathy estate belonged to a different realm. Wrought iron gates, soaring high enough to deter any interloper, guarded a snaking driveway. The mansion materialized in the distance, a Gothic monstrosity of spires and gables, more reminiscent of a desolate keep than a family dwelling. As he drove closer, the air thickened with the scent of sodden earth mixed with a heady, sickly sweet fragrance, like an overdose of perfume. He parked near the rear of the house, where an unkempt trail vanished into the tree lane. A solitary light glowed from a basement window. He killed the engine, the sudden quiet intensifying the relentless patter of the rain. He drew a deep breath, bracing himself for the macabre task at hand. He inventoried the shovel and the small sack of quicklime. He hoped it would suffice. He reached for the door handle, a knot of revulsion twisting in his gut. This wasn't him. He wasn't a common thief, or a whatever this made him. He was Dusty Rivers, a rancher, a father, a husband. But tonight, he was simply a man desperate enough to conceal a grave. A mansion of secrets. The wrought iron gates, their hinges protesting with a rasp like a death rattle, grudgingly yielded to Dusty's push. Before him, Abernathy Mansion clawed at the sky, a Gothic nightmare composed of crumbling stone and lightless windows. Less a stately home, more a set piece for a horror film. Grandeur, even decayed, he'd pictured. This was simply off. He idled his truck in the weedy circle drive. No sign of life. Crowley, the undertaker, was conspicuously absent. Only silence, thick as thieves, reigned, punctuated by the raucous squawk of a solitary crow perched on a grotesque gargoyle. The promised payment, a sum vital to saving his ranch, now felt tainted, earned through more than simple manual labor and silence. Dusty killed the engine. The quiet descended, smothering. He unfolded himself from a cab, the slam of the door echoing with unnatural force. Adjusting his hat brim offered scant comfort. He'd buried animals aplenty. Never a body. Never anything like this. The front door, a massive slab of oak-bound and dull brass, stood ajar, an invitation he hadn't requested. Hesitation snagged at him. Crowley should have been here, offering guidance, instructions. Instead, just a hushed phone call and an untraceable envelope filled with bills. He nudged the door wider. Inside, the entrance hall yawned, a shadowed expanse where dust motes danced in the meager sunlight filtering through grime-coated stained glass. The air hung cold and clammy, redolent of mildew and a deeper, more ancient decay. A sweeping staircase ascended into the gloom like a shadowy embrace. Cobwebs, like morbid bunting, festooned elaborate chandeliers. A faint skittering echoed within the walls, underscored by the rhythmic plink, plink, plink of dripping water. "Hello?" he ventured, his voice sounding frail in the echoing void. Only the silence responded. He edged inward, boots crunching on the thick layer of dust blanketing the marble floor. To the left, a doorway opened onto what must have been a parlor. Phantoms of furniture huddled beneath dust sheets, pale and indistinct in the dimness. To his right, another doorway beckoned, leading to an even darker space. He approached with caution, his hand instinctively finding the small knife he routinely carried. He crossed the threshold. The room felt smaller, almost constricting. And there, centered on a lavish, undeniably antique bier, stood the coffin. Open. Dusty swallowed thickly. White satin cushioned the interior. Empty. He edged closer. The air here felt distinctly colder, the faint, indescribable odor in the hall, now a sharp, acrid tang. Slowly, he circled the casket, his gaze sweeping the room. Nothing seemed disturbed, save for the stark emptiness of the coffin itself. Where was she? Where the hell was Crowley? A knot of icy dread cinched his gut. This was no longer a mere clandestine burial. Something had gone terribly awry. He retreated from the coffin, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to get out, clear his head. Was saving his ranch worth whatever nightmare was unfolding in this forsaken place? As he pivoted to leave, a sudden, ferocious draft surged through the mansion, detonating a door somewhere above with a thunderous crack. Dusty flinched, his hand snapping to his knife. He spun, eyes darting, seeking the source. Nothing. Only the vacant coffin and the escalating certainty that he was no longer alone. Eyes wide open. The coffin was heavier than it looked. Dusty grunted, bracing his boots against the slick clay at the bottom of the freshly dug grave. Rain had been spitting on and off all morning, turning the earth to a greasy mud that threatened to swallow his worn leatherwork boots whole. His back screamed in protest with each careful inch he lowered the polished wood box. The Abernathy woman, bless her soul, had always been petite, but this felt like hauling a sack of lead. He glanced up at the figure silhouetted against the gray sky, Mr. Abernathy's lawyer, all sharp angles and nervous coughs. The man offered no help, just watched with an unsettling intensity. Dusty bit back a curse, adjusting his grip, the rough-hewn rope biting into his calloused hands. He reminded himself of the money, the kind of money that could keep his ranch afloat for another year, maybe two. Money that made him complicit in, well, he wasn't sure exactly what he was complicit in. Just a quiet burial, far from prying eyes. That's what the lawyer had called it. With a final, straining heave, the coffin settled into the hole with a dull thud. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight, filtering through the clouds. Dusty straightened, his muscles trembling, ready to scramble out of the grave and be done with this whole unsavory business. Then he saw it, a flicker, barely perceptible but undeniable. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, visible through the small gap in the coffin lid he'd been instructed to leave slightly ajar, fluttered. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, a reflection. But then her eyelids lifted again, and her eyes, a startling, vibrant blue against the pale stillness of her face, stared directly at him. A gasp escaped her lips, a weak, rattling sound that sent a jolt of ice through Dusty's veins. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He stared back, transfixed, his mind reeling. She wasn't dead. She couldn't be. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow, labored breath. Her gaze, though weak, held a spark of intelligence, of awareness. She was looking at him, seeing him. A silent plea, perhaps? Or was it accusation? He scrambled back, his boots slipping in the mud, banging his elbow against the rough-hewn side of the grave. He wanted to shout, to scream, to run. But he was trapped, both physically in the muddy pit and morally in the web of his own desperate choices. The lawyer coughed again, a sharp, impatient sound. "Is there a problem, Mr. Rivers?" Dusty couldn't speak. He could only point, a trembling finger extended towards the coffin. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes were wide open now, fixed on him. He could see the faint tremor in her lips as she tried to form words. But all that came out was a faint, raspy whisper lost in the wind. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was supposed to bury her. That was the deal. But she was alive. And looking at him, he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. What was he going to do? He couldn't bury her alive. Could he? The lawyer was starting to descend the slope towards the grave, his expression hardening. "Mr. Rivers, I asked you a question." Dusty's mind raced, desperately searching for a solution, an escape. But there was none. He was caught between a rock and a hard place, between the promise of money and the horror of what he was about to do or not do. He looked back at Mrs. Abernathy. Her eyes were still on him, pleading, desperate. And in that moment, he knew. He couldn't do it. He just couldn't. But what then? A secret agreement. Mrs. Abernathy's gaze was unervingly intense behind the shimmering lenses of her spectacles, which magnified her stare. "Mr. Rivers," she rasped, her voice like autumn leaves skittering across pavement, "I haven't presented the entire truth." Dusty shifted in the creaking armchair, its leather worn smooth with age. Figures. The whole affair stank of hidden agendas, as potent as her heavy perfume. So I surmised. Her fingertips met, forming a precise steeple. "I am afflicted with a peculiar malady, Mr. Rivers. Catalepsy. It mimics death with unsettling fidelity. My vital signs diminish to the point of near non-existence. I appear, for all outward observation, deceased." A cold ripple raced across Dusty's skin, a stark contrast to the heart's glow. He swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. "You're saying you could be—" The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. "Precisely. Mistaken for dead." A fleeting, spectral smile brushed her lips. "And on occasion I am." He stared, grappling to reconcile this sharp-witted woman with the macabre proposition she'd just laid bare. The silence drew out, disturbed only by the fire's snap and hiss. "The funeral," he finally croaked, his voice rough. "It's a charade? A test, Mr. Rivers, of mettle, of allegiance, and, crucially, of avarice." She leaned forward, eyes fixed on him. "My kin, you see, are circling carrion birds. They've anticipated my demise for years, eager for a swift probate and division of my estate. They presume me to be incapacitated." Dusty envisioned his cracked earth, his dwindling livestock, the bank's relentless pressure. He pictured his father's gnarled hands, a testament to a lifetime of struggle on land that seemed intent on blowing away. He understood greed, yes. He understood the vice grip of desperation even better. "So you want me to—" The word snagged. "I want you to proceed as scheduled, Mr. Rivers, but with a significant adjustment. Instead of consigning an empty box to the earth, or a substitute, you will inter me. Temporarily, naturally." Dusty's mind spun. This transcended anything he'd anticipated. He rose, traversing the room, his boots soundless on the thick rug. He raked a hand through his hair, a silent display of his internal chaos. "I don't know, Mrs. Abernathy," he demurred, his voice a low rumble. "This is madness. Perhaps. But tell me, Mr. Rivers, are you a man who honors his commitments?" He ceased his pacing, meeting her unwavering gaze. "I strive to be, and possess you compassion, a willingness to aid one in need, even at a personal risk." Her words were a pointed goad to his conscience. He recalled the way she'd regarded him assisting her from the carriage, a flicker of something akin to respect. He considered the sum of money a lifeline for his ranch, a chance for his family to catch its breath. "What comes next?" he asked, barely audible. "Next, I awaken. You, with discretion, retrieve me. Then we observe the ensuing bedlam. It promises to be quite diverting." A genuine, almost impish, smile softened the severe angles of her face. He studied her, truly studied her, and saw not a frail, eccentric woman of advanced years, but a force of nature, resolved to dictate her fate even from what appeared to be beyond the veil. Dusty inhaled deeply. The weight of the decision pressed down. He was keenly aware of its impropriety, its ethical ambiguity, its potential for ruin. But his options had dwindled to nothing. And something about this woman, this audacious scheme, resonated deep within him. "All right, Mrs. Abernathy," he conceded, extending his hand. "I'm in." Her grip surprised him with its strength. "Excellent. And Mr. Rivers?" "Yes. This remains inviolably between us. Utter secrecy is paramount." He nodded, his expression grim. "My lips are sealed." He fervently prayed he wouldn't live to rue this. The gathering of vultures. The first vulture arrived in a gleaming black automobile that swallowed the driveway whole. Bartholomew Abernathy, a man whose smile never quite reached his calculating eyes, unfolded himself in the vehicle with theatrical grace. He wore a suit the color of charcoal, a stark contrast to the sun-baked landscape, and carried a silver-topped cane that he didn't appear to need. Dusty Rivers, leaning against the porch railing, watched him approach. Bartholomew paused halfway, feigning a sob that produced no tears. "Poor Agatha," he boomed, his voice carrying on the dry wind. "Gone too soon. Such a vibrant woman." Dusty grunted in acknowledgement, his discomfort growing. He'd been paid handsomely to ensure Agatha's absence remained permanent. Now, seeing her cousin prancing around like a raven eyeing carrion made the whole arrangement feel even more soiled. Inside, the house was already buzzing. Agatha's other relatives, a motley collection of second cousins and distant nieces, had descended like locusts. Their hushed whispers and furtive glances spoke volumes. Dusty could practically taste the anticipation hanging thick in the air. "Did you hear she never updated the will after poor Uncle Cecil passed?" A woman with a beehive hairdo hissed to another, her voice barely above a stage whisper. "That means Gertrude gets a share, and she's already got that beachfront property in Malibu." "Malibu," the other woman gasped, clutching her pearls. "Well, I always said Agatha favored Gertrude. Never could stand me, ever since I accidentally let her prize-winning Persian out in the rain." Dusty wandered into the parlor, trying to appear nonchalant. The room, usually filled with Agatha's eccentric charm, felt suffocated by their presence. They circled like sharks, eyeing the antique furniture and assessing its potential value. He saw Bartholomew, perched on the edge of a velvet chaise lounge, holding court with a younger woman who hung on his every word. "Of course, darling," Bartholomew was saying, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "Agatha always valued my business acumen. I wouldn't be surprised if she entrusted me with certain responsibilities." He winked, a gesture that sent a shiver down Dusty's spine. Dusty's stomach churned. He needed a drink. He slipped into the kitchen, hoping to find something stronger than the weak tea the relatives were sipping. The air in here was thick with the smell of lavender and dust, a ghostly reminder of Agatha's presence. He found a bottle of whiskey tucked away in a cupboard and poured himself a generous shot. As he swallowed the fiery liquid, he looked out the window. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the yard. He saw Bartholomew strolling towards the barn, his silver cane glinting in the fading light. What was he up to? Dusty felt a knot tighten in his gut. He was a rancher, not a criminal. He'd taken Agatha's money out of desperation, a way to save his failing ranch. But the sight of these vultures, circling and squawking over her supposed remains, made him question everything. He had to protect Agatha, even if she was technically dead. Or was she? He remembered the feeling of her hand in his as she squeezed it, her eyes full of life when she was supposed to be lifeless. The image made his head spin. He drained the glass and set it down with a clink. He had a feeling tonight was going to be a long one. And Bartholomew, with his slicked-back hair and predatory smile, was at the center of it all. Dusty had to find out what he was planning. Whispers in the walls. Dusty swallowed, the sugary sweetness of the lavender polish failing to soothe the unease churning within him. Sleep had been a luxury since Agatha's passing, a loss that felt like a brand on his soul. Guilt, a persistent shadow, clung to him. He should be mourning her, not delving into the murky lives of her kin. "Come, Dusty," Mrs. Abernathy's voice, a hushed breath, barely registered over the grandfather clock's solemn chime. Before a panel of intricate oak in the library, she traced an almost invisible join. "I believe it's time we discovered our esteemed house guest's true motives." He watched, mesmerized, as she triggered a concealed mechanism. The wood swung open, revealing a narrow passage choked with ages of undisturbed grime. "Secret passages?" he murmured, a blend of question and surprise. "An Abernathy affectation," she offered, a spark of wry amusement in her eye. Born of an era when privacy was precious and eavesdropping pragmatic. She nodded toward the opening. "After you, Mr. Rivers. Best hold your breath. The dust is practically fossilized." The passage was tight, the air heavy with the stale breath of forgotten years. Dusty followed, his shoulders grazing the clammy stone. They moved almost silently, their footfalls absorbed by the thick carpets on the other side. At last, Mrs. Abernathy halted, indicating a pinprick hole bored through the wall. It offered a clear view of the drawing room. Bartholomew and Penelope, bathed in the fire's dance, sat close. "Listen carefully," she breathed, her words a warm whisper against his ear. Bartholomew's voice, a low rumble, filled the space. "The old woman is proving more resilient than anticipated. She continues to resist signing. Surely, there's a means to encourage her," Penelope countered, her tone laced with acid impatience. "We cannot afford to delay, Bartholomew. The obligations—" "I'm addressing it," Bartholomew snapped. "I've already massaged several documents. A minor amendment here, an overlooked detail there. Subtle changes, enough to guarantee control after the inevitable." A wave of scorching anger surged through Dusty. He glanced at Mrs. Abernathy. Her face remained a composed mask, yet her eyes blazed with icy fury. "What obligations?" Penelope pressed, her voice gaining volume. "You assured me those were resolved." "They will be the instant I gain access to Agatha's holdings," Bartholomew replied, his voice a silken lie. "A few unfortunate investments, nothing more. Nothing for you to concern yourself with, darling." Mrs. Abernathy shifted to another aperture, this one overlooking the study. Through it, Bartholomew's briefcase gaped open on the desk, its contents strewn across the surface. She summoned Dusty closer. Amongst the chaos of legal forms, Dusty noticed something that chilled him to the bone. A will, or, more accurately, a fraudulent imitation. The signature, a clumsy caricature of Agatha's elegant hand, the stipulations blatant and grasping, granting Bartholomew absolute dominion over the estate. Further inspection unveiled ledgers crammed with entries, detailing considerable sums owed to individuals of questionable repute. Bartholomew teetered on the brink of financial ruin, a steeper drop than he had ever revealed. "He's a cornered animal," Mrs. Abernathy murmured, her voice a silken thread. And a cornered animal bites hardest. Dusty straightened, his gaze hardening. He had arrived to bury a woman, but now, it seemed, he was destined to unearth a man's deception. He met Mrs. Abernathy's gaze. Beneath the frail facade dwelled a formidable spirit, and he, Dusty Rivers, stood firmly in her corner. The chase. The dust motes danced in the beam of Bartholomew's flashlight, finally revealing what he'd suspected all along. Behind the tapestry, depicting a particularly gruesome boar hunt, the stones weren't flush. A faint line traced the outline of a cleverly disguised door. He smirked, the flickering light glinting off his gold tooth. Clever girl, Agatha, but not clever enough. He shoved the tapestry aside, revealing the outline fully. After some fiddling, a section of the stone wall swung inward with a low groan, releasing a musty breath of aged earth and forgotten secrets. Bartholomew adjusted his tie, a predatory glint in his eyes. After them, lads, and don't break anything unless you have to. Dusty heard the commotion from the library. Mrs. Abernathy, perched on a precarious stack of first editions, froze. He's found it, hasn't he? She whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. Looks that way, Dusty confirmed, already grabbing her arm. Time to go, and hold on tight. He pulled her from her perch, the stack of books toppling with a thunderous crash that echoed through the hall. No time to worry about the noise. He yanked open a hidden panel behind the fireplace, a secret passage he'd only discovered yesterday while ostensibly checking the flue, and shoved Mrs. Abernathy inside. This way, he urged, plunging into the darkness after her. The passage was narrow and damp, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and vaguely unpleasant. Dusty fumbled for his lighter, the tiny flame casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls. Behind them, Bartholomew's voice boomed. They're in the passages. Spread out. Find them. Dusty grabbed Mrs. Abernathy's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. They hurried through the twisting tunnels, the sound of Bartholomew and his men echoing behind them, growing closer with each passing moment. Faster, Mr. Rivers, Mrs. Abernathy gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Call me Dusty, remember? He replied, though his own lungs were burning. He pushed her forward, navigating a sharp turn that led into a low-ceilinged chamber. Bartholomew's goons weren't far behind. Dusty could hear their heavy footsteps and muttered curses as they stumbled through the maze. He spied a narrow opening in the far wall, barely large enough to squeeze through. In here, they scrambled through the opening, emerging into what appeared to be a forgotten wine cellar. Rows upon rows of dusty bottles lined the walls, shrouded in cobwebs. The air hung thick with the scent of aging wine and decay. Suddenly, a bottle dislodged from its resting place, plummeting to the stone floor with a shattering crash. Damn it, Dusty hissed. Bartholomew's voice, now close, dripped with triumph. Got them. In the cellar. Mrs. Abernathy, surprisingly nimble for her age, grabbed a bottle of what appeared to be ancient port. Distraction, she declared, and hurled it at the approaching sound. A startled yelp followed the shattering of glass. They used the moment of confusion to dart behind a towering stack of wine crates. This way, Dusty whispered, noticing a small, wooden door tucked away in a shadowed corner. He pulled it open, revealing a dark, descending staircase. Where does this lead? Mrs. Abernathy asked, her eyes wide with apprehension. Only one way to find out, Dusty said, and plunged into the darkness, pulling her after him. He could hear Bartholomew's enraged bellow echoing through the cellar as they descended into the unknown depths of Abernathy Manor. Revelation. The air in the Abernathy hall crackled, thick with unspoken accusations and barely veiled animosity. Dusty stood near the doorway, a phantom ache throbbing behind his ribs. He watched Bartholomew, whose slicked-back hair gleamed under the chandelier light, and fought the urge to plant a fist in his smug face. Suddenly, a dry cough echoed from the top of the grand staircase. Every head snapped up, Mrs. Abernathy, wrapped in a shawl the color of faded violets, descended slowly, each step deliberate. She moved with a grace that belied her supposed frailty, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Well," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "this is certainly a gathering, though not quite the kind I anticipated." Bartholomew, ever the opportunist, stepped forward. "Agatha, you're looking much better." He extended a hand, which she ignored. "Spare me the pleasantries, Bartholomew. I've had a rather enlightening few days." Her gaze swept over the assembled relatives, each one a masterpiece of carefully constructed grief. "It appears my impending demise has brought out the best, or rather, the worst in all of you." A nervous titter rippled through the room, quickly stifled. Mrs. Abernathy continued, her voice hardening. "Dusty here has been invaluable. He has a way of noticing details, things that others overlook." She gave Dusty a small, almost imperceptible nod. He felt a flush creep up his neck. "Details like the suspiciously high dose of my medication, conveniently administered by my dear nephew." She pinned Bartholomew with a glare that could curdle milk. His carefully constructed composure began to crack, a thin line of sweat appearing on his forehead. "Agatha, were you suggesting?" he stammered, his voice losing its practiced smoothness. "Oh, Bartholomew, please. Let's not insult our collective intelligence. Or rather, yours. You underestimated mine, I'm afraid." She produced a small, intricately carved box from the folds of her shawl. Opening it, she revealed a stack of documents tied with a faded ribbon. "These," she announced, holding up the box, "are codicils to my will, each meticulously detailing your individual contributions to my recent difficulties." She began to read, her voice ringing with icy disdain. "To Bartholomew Abernathy, for his unwavering dedication to my well-being, I bequeath the sum of $1, and a stern recommendation to seek employment that doesn't involve preying on the vulnerable." Bartholomew's face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of green. The other relatives shifted uncomfortably as Mrs. Abernathy continued her pronouncements. A diamond necklace, meant for a niece who had feigned concern while openly discussing the redecoration of Agatha's bedroom, was instead designated for a local animal shelter. A vintage car, coveted by a cousin who had spent more time inquiring about its value than about Agatha's health, was promised to the ranch hands. Each bequest was accompanied by a sharp, insightful commentary on the recipient's character. Dusty watched, a strange mix of satisfaction and unease churning in his gut. He hadn't expected this. He didn't know what he'd expected, but not a complete dismantling of their carefully laid plans. Finally, Mrs. Abernathy closed the box. "As for the remainder of my estate," she announced, her gaze landing on Dusty, "I shall decide its disposition in due course. Perhaps," she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I'll even find a worthy recipient who isn't motivated solely by greed." She turned and, with a final withering look at Bartholomew, began to ascend the stairs again, leaving behind a room filled with stunned silence and the acrid scent of shattered illusions. Dusty remained by the door, unsure of what to do, but certain of one thing: the game had changed, and he was still caught in the middle. A new beginning. The dust swirled around Mrs. Abernathy's ankles as she surveyed the dilapidated barn. The morning sun, sharp and unforgiving, revealed every crack in the weathered wood. Dusty stood beside her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. He'd expected her to be horrified, to demand her money back. Instead, a curious glint sparkled in her eyes. "Dusty," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, "this place, it needs life. Not just a quick patch-up, but a real revitalization." He finally looked up, a flicker of hope warring with the ever-present guilt in his eyes. "Ma'am, I don't know if I'm the man for that." "Nonsense," she retorted, waving a dismissive hand. "You've got grit, Dusty. I saw it when you faced down that storm single-handed, and I see it now behind all that. Remorse." She paused, her gaze softening slightly. "I'm going to help you, Dusty. Not just with the ranch, but with the whole community. He stared at her, speechless. "I've been thinking," she continued, her voice taking on a practical tone. "This town needs a school. A proper one, with books and supplies. And a clinic. People shouldn't have to travel miles for a simple remedy." Dusty's jaw tightened. He knew firsthand the cost of that distance. "I'll fund it," she declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And you, Dusty, will oversee the construction. You know this land, you know these people. You're the one they'll trust." He swallowed hard, the weight of her trust settling heavily on his shoulders. "Why me, Mrs. Abernathy?" She smiled, a fleeting, almost mischievous expression. "Let's just say I have a knack for seeing potential where others don't. And besides," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I believe in second chances." The following weeks were a blur of activity. Lumber arrived, along with carpenters and masons. The clang of hammers and the roar of saws filled the air, replacing the desolate silence that had haunted the ranch for so long. Dusty, fueled by Mrs. Abernathy's unwavering belief in him, threw himself into the work. He spent his days coordinating the construction, mending fences, and tending to the small herd of cattle he'd managed to salvage. He saw Bartholomew skulking around the edges of the property a few times, a dark shadow lingering just beyond the light of progress. Each time, a cold dread coiled in Dusty's gut, a reminder of the secrets he carried. Mrs. Abernathy, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of energy. She visited the construction sites daily, offering advice, encouragement, and the occasional pointed critique. She charmed the workers with her wit and impressed them with her knowledge of everything from carpentry to animal husbandry. Slowly, the ranch began to transform. The barn, once a dilapidated eyesore, was now sturdy and gleaming. The fields, once choked with weeds, were now lush and green, promising a bountiful harvest. New life was breathed into the land, mirroring the slow healing taking place within Dusty himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Dusty found Mrs. Abernathy sitting on the porch of the newly renovated farmhouse, a contented smile on her face. He sat beside her, the silence comfortable and companionable. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." She turned to him, her eyes twinkling in the fading light. "Don't thank me, Dusty. You did the work. You brought this place back to life." She paused, her gaze searching his face. "True wealth isn't about money, Dusty. It's about what you create, what you leave behind." He looked out at the flourishing ranch, the schoolhouse rising proudly in the distance, the clinic buzzing with activity. He understood now. He finally understood. "I still don't understand why you chose to help me, though, ma'am." She chuckled softly, the sound like wind chimes in the evening breeze. "Perhaps," she said, her voice laced with a hint of mystery, "I saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself. Or perhaps," she added, her eyes twinkling mischievously, "I simply enjoy watching the world squirm." Dusty laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh that echoed across the valley. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. He still carried the burden of his past, but now he also carried hope. And in that hope, he found the strength to face whatever the future might hold. The friendship growing between himself and this strange, wonderful woman was a blessing he never expected, and one he would cherish always.